SJR11.
Thank you, Senator. Hopefully there won't be many questions since there's not many members. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator. I'm Mike Serper from the 8th in Jackson County. Senate Bill 104 is a responsible way for us to reduce personal property tax in our counties. Starting January 1st, 2024, it reduces the assessed true value by 1% per year, reducing it from 33 1/3 to 20% over that period of time, up until 2036. So a $10,000 car assessed today at 33 1/3 and generating a tax of $266 with an $8 levy. In 2024, the assessed true value would be 32%, and the tax bill would be $256. When fully implemented in 2036, this tax bill would be $160. So this maybe have to, I know the fiscal note's going to be very large, so we may have to push this out a little bit so it's staggered in quicker, or maybe not go down to 20%, maybe stop at 25%. But it's a starting point of a conversation to help folks back home, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator. Are you done with your testimony?
I am.
Okay. We're going to call roll real quick to get a quorum established. The Senate Committee on General Laws, Matt, please call the roll.
Senators Bernstetter.
Here.
Present. Searpoy. Present. Beck. Black. Present. Bratton.
Here.
Present. Huff. Razor. We have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Thank you for your patience, Senator. Any questions, Senator? Senator Bratton, go ahead.
More so, I guess not so much a question. I know a lot of discussion is dealing with the amount of tax burden that's upon our constituents. But one thing that I think we continue to leave out is the way all this money is brought in and the way that it's siloed. All these taxing districts and no capability for ebb and flow. And then I think that's the frustration. People are sending in all this money, and then we keep hearing from our local taxing districts of we don't have enough money. I know in Cass County, when I was auditor, we brought in about $142 million, and almost $100 million of that was going to school districts, and to fund the remainder of all government, was the $42 million. And I see this as a huge gap in the capability to be able to fund government properly, because everything is siloed in a taxing district. And I know of the entire nation, there's over 6,000 taxing districts. Missouri has over 1/3 of them just in our state. And I think that's one thing that, these are great, but we'll never actually, truly deal with the problem and the issue of the fact that everybody's created we've created this silo system to where it's never enough, and there's never capability to move money like we do here in this budget process, to where if we need to take money here and put there and reinvest into this department, that department, whatever. So I know I'm not trying to filibuster, but that's one thing I continue to hear this, and we don't want to hurt local government and firefighters and so on and so forth. But I think that's the elephant in the room that we have to look at and to discuss to be able to diversify where taxpayer dollars are going. So I appreciate your bill and what you're trying to do, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Anybody here to testify in favor of, what did I say? It was Senate Bill 104. Anybody to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 104? Anybody for informational purposes only? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 104. Senator SJR11, go ahead with that whenever you're ready, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully this will be just as quick. Senate Joint Resolution 11 is effort to remove some of the tax burden on our working families. It removes non-commercial vehicles from the tax rules once they are 11 years old. In general, most families driving older vehicles are working families, and this would give them genuine relief. I know the fiscal note will be very large, because I did this 2 years ago and it was $370 million. So the 10-year cutoff maybe has to be pushed out to start and then slowly roll it forward. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, Anybody testify in favor of SJR11? Anybody in opposition to SJR11? Anybody for informational purposes only? Nobody likes your ideas, evidently.
Well, I would argue nobody hates them.
Nobody hates them? Okay. Well, that's another way of putting it. Thank you, Senator. That concludes the hearing on SJR11. Senator Koenig, whenever you're ready, Senate Bill 95. Please proceed.
Thank you, members of the committee. Allowing me to present Senate Bill 95, Senator Andrew Koenig from the 15th District out of West St. Louis County. This is a bill dealing with property taxes. It actually is a different approach from what other bills does. Others bills do. What this one does is sometimes you have inequities in assess valuations of properties. You might have someone who appeals their taxes and then they get denied a refund because maybe they were at market value. But the problem is maybe the average for the county is much lower. Maybe the average was 80%. So there's inequities on how one property versus another property is assessed. And so this seeks to fix that. Over the course of time, there's been numerous court cases when dealing with this issue. There was, in 2009, there was a court case that said 14% was not considered excessive. 2019, 10% was not grossly excessive. But in 2016, 8.8% was considered excessive. So even throughout the different court cases, there's been different court cases saying different things about what an inequity is. And so this seeks to clear that up and make things more equitable across how assessments are actually assessed. There's also a provision dealing with if an appeal is done then and is won, then they're allowed to get interest as well. So with that, I'll take any questions.
So you mentioned those court cases. Were they all in Missouri?
Yeah, these are all Missouri court cases. There's other ones too I could point to. There was one saying in 2015 that 5% was not considered excessive. But the bottom line is we have courts saying different things over the course of time, and there's on what is an excessive inequity.
So do you define excessive in your legislation?
What we say is what we do is we define it if an appeal is done, then the taxpayer is supposed to get equal. So like whatever it is, if it's assessed at 80%, then you can go down to 80%. You can't stay at the 100%.
Okay. Any questions? Seeing none. Anybody speak in favor of Senate Bill 95? Please come forward. Let us know who you are, and please fill out a witness form if you haven't already filled one out online.
Good morning. My name's Tad Berry, and I am with, Director of Client Service with Property Assessment Review in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm here to support Senate Bill 95. Thank the committee for their time. Thank Senator Koenig. I might just say ditto and then walk away, but I'll elaborate a bit on why we think this is an important bill. As the senator put very, very well, this bill gives Missouri taxpayers the right to be treated fair and equally throughout their assessments. Taxpayers are generally expected to only pay their fair share in taxes. That's kind of the bedrock principle of our taxation scheme. What this bill will allow a taxpayer to do is prove that an assessor and a county has actually established a system by which they have maybe or they've been assessed at a fair market value that is correct. However, the assessor has undervalued and systematically set assessments at a percentage significantly lower than what fair market value is. So as the senator alluded to, 80%. We've had numerous court cases where there is no real bright line for what that margin of error is. This bill allows the taxpayer to file an appeal, prove what the difference is in that assessment, what that inequity is, and then gives the taxpayer that same treatment. So it sets an equal standard for all taxpayers after that appeal, and they prove out whatever that number is. If it's 80%, they get 80%. If it's 95, they get 95. But there's none of this kind of stick your finger in the air and say, well, that's 10%. That's de minimis. That's within the margin of error. No big deal. I would posit that any taxpayer paying their tax bill at the end of the year, if you tacked on a 10% margin of error addition, they'd be pretty upset by that. So again, this just gives us that direct assessment and allows the taxpayer to pay no more than their fair share. With that, I welcome any questions you may have. But
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Anybody else to testify in favor of Senate Bill 95?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. Chuck Pierce, representing Associated Industries of Missouri. Go on record in support of this. The sponsor and the previous witness have done a great job explaining this. I really don't have anything to add, but I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Anybody else testify in favor of Senate Bill 95? Anybody else want to speak against Senate Bill 95? Those for informational purposes only. Thank you, Senator Koenig. That concludes the hearing. Next up, we have Senator Eigel, Senate Bill 10. Please come forward.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm State Senator Bill Eigel from the 23rd State Senatorial District. Happy to present Senate Bill 10 for the committee. Senate Bill 10 is the Anti-Red Flag Gun Seizure Act, and specifically what it does is two primary things. One, it prohibits the enforcement by state authorities of any judicial or executive order that is an attempt to enact any sort of red flag or other gun control measures in the state of Missouri. This kind of builds out on what we previously did as a legislature under the Second Amendment Preservation Act. The second thing that it does, and probably even more pressing, is it restricts the ability of local entities from accepting dollars from the federal government that are designed to incentivize those local areas to create their own red flag databases and systems. In fact, this is particularly pressing. We just found out that Missouri was recently awarded a grant of $4.5 million from the federal government to be used for, and I want to make sure I get the term right, crisis intervention programs, which may include gun control measures such as red flags laws. So the federal government, the Biden administration, is trying very hard to try to use federal dollars to be sent into the state of Missouri to incentivize the creation of these red flag databases. That is precisely what my bill addresses. So it's very straightforward, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So the grant, did it just come to the state, or did it come to a community or city?
So
it
went to the Missouri Department of Public Safety as part of their crisis intervention program, and allows the Department of Public Safety to distribute the dollars from there. But these dollars in particular could be explicitly used for the creation of these databases. So we do have a concern that they may try to send the dollars directly, even outside of an appropriation from the state, to local areas. We saw this issue come up during the COVID environment, that we had to push back on this. But it's something that we feel like this is just the first step of dollars we're going to see coming down. And I think the federal government is very aware of how vulnerable the state of Missouri is because of how much it likes receiving federal money.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions? Seeing none. Anybody testify in favor of Senate Bill 10, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Aaron Dorr. I'm here on behalf of the Missouri Firearms Coalition, and we're in full support of Senate Bill 10. Our members are very concerned about red flag laws insofar as they allow a judge to confiscate someone's firearms having not been convicted of anything, charged even of anything. And this bill is designed to deal with that, because currently red flag laws as applied shred our gun rights as well as our Fourth Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment rights, Sixth and Seventh Amendment rights. SB10 would prevent that here in Missouri. The bill on page 1 defines what a red flag law is, but it also makes it clear this bill does not apply to felons or those with domestic violence convictions or those who are facing protective orders. It only applies to law-abiding citizens. On page 2, section 3, we show how red flag laws violate the Missouri State Constitution. As you heard from the senator on page 2, section 4, it makes it clear state agencies and subdivisions shall not receive federal money for the purpose of enforcing a red flag gun seizure. With this $5.4 million recently received by Missouri, that's a very real threat that we're concerned about on behalf of our members. Page 2, section 5 bans the enforcement of any red flag gun seizure law by state and local authorities. And finally, on subsection 1 and 2, we have penalties. We're using civil penalties as we had in SAPA legislation, which passed in 2021. And we're also allowing the AG to bring criminal charges against a jurisdiction who would violate this section. At the end of the day, our members are very concerned about red flag laws, and we'd ask you guys to advance this bill, which would block them altogether here in Missouri. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Anybody else in favor of Senate Bill 10, please come forward.
He's going to make me feel like I need a booster seat, I can just tell. Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Susan Myers from the 20th District. And as a volunteer leader for 2 national nonpartisan organizations, both focused on women and firearms, I work alongside women who have experienced tragic and horrific violence in their lives. Women who come out the other side resolved to never again be anyone's victim. So to be clear, the views I express here have not been reached without giving the dangers that so many women face on a daily basis the weight they deserve. To the contrary, it is for these reasons that I am here to give voice to the women who fully understand the dangers involved within domestic violence and yet are adamant in their belief that secretive firearm confiscation laws without due process can easily be used to disarm the very women they are purported to keep safe. Like, say, for instance, when the abuser files a red flag on his spouse or girlfriend, claiming she's been depressed and he fears that she could harm herself. In truth, he may have gotten the sense that she has just about reached her limit and is mustering up the courage to leave. So he needs to prevent her from arming herself before she bolts. Don't think it could happen? Let me share a case out of New York from just this past year where a woman's ex-boyfriend, who had a restraining order out against him, alleged she made remarks causing him to believe she was a threat to herself, him, or others. In the petition, this man lied about the timeline of her remarks to say they occurred within the past 6 months, as the law requires. Despite the judge knowing of the false statements, out of an abundance of caution, a temporary extreme risk protection order was issued and her pistol permit was revoked, all without her even being aware it was happening. Thankfully, this woman didn't just hire a lawyer to regain her own rights. They went after the New York law's constitutionality. This is a portion of the judge's ruling from this past December. This court is not unmindful of the dangers firearms may pose when possessed in the hands of a person suffering a mental illness, harboring a criminal intent, or both. However, when viewed objectively, 63A's goal of removing weapons from the otherwise lawful possession of them by their owners without adequate constitutional safeguards cannot be condoned by this court. While some may advocate that the ends justify the means in support of 63A, Where those means violate a fundamental right under our Bill of Rights to achieve their ends, then the law on its face cannot stand. And that was Judge Moran, Justice of the New York Supreme Court. I support the notion of using the 10th Amendment to make it clear to future state leaders who may undoubtedly be tempted by federal dollars that Missourians' rights are not for sale. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? Thank you for your testimony.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else speak in favor of Senate Bill 10, please come forward.
My name is Kevin Hurdle, and I'm here to speak in favor of this bill. Since Senator Eigel and Aaron Dorr kind of brought out the details of the bill and everything, I'm going to take a different direction on this. You know, if you look at any of the amendments to the Constitution, the Second Amendment probably has the most clearest, concise, and straightforward passage. Shall not be infringed. Now, we just passed SEPA. Was that 2 years ago now? And so basically the people of Missouri spoke out. We don't want federal encroachment. We've had enough of it, and yet they're still at it. They're trying to, you know, use our tax dollars to establish this red flag stuff. But hopefully, you know, I'll support any bill that'll do anything to check that. Because like I said, people have already spoke. We don't want any of these anti-gun laws here in Missouri. I mean, really not much else to add to that. It's pretty straightforward. Shall not be infringed. Simple as that. We passed SEPA, so I would think it'd be up to the legislature to uphold our laws that we pass here in Missouri. I'll take any questions from anyone.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. Anybody else that speak in favor of Senate Bill 10, please come forward.
Thanks.
Anybody in opposition of Senate Bill 10?
Hi, thank you. My name's Kristen Bowen. I'm a volunteer with the Missouri chapter of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. I'm also a mom of 2 boys, one in college and one in high school in Columbia. And I'm here today to urge the members of this committee to oppose the proposals that are before the Missouri legislature that would further weaken the gun laws of our state, and that includes Senate Bill 10. This bill expands nullification in Missouri by declaring federal and state judicial orders requiring the relinquishment of firearms from, quote, law-abiding citizens as a Second Amendment infringement. But the bill also would bar Missouri from receiving federal funding for enforcing laws requiring the relinquishment of firearms, ammunition, or accessories. But Missouri already has some of the weakest gun laws in the country, and our legislature has spent the past decade or so gutting our common sense gun safety laws while resisting attempts that would make our communities safer. And Missourians honestly have been paying the price for this effort with their lives. Missouri's rate of gun death has increased 70% since from 2011 to 2020, compared to a 33% increase nationwide. That means that in 2020, we saw 572 more gun deaths than in 2011. So I want to put the nullification law, the so-called Second Amendment Preservation Act, into this context. In 2021, as we've heard, our governor signed a bill that would nullify federal gun laws in our state and penalize law enforcement just for trying to enforce the rules that keep Missourians safe from gun violence. And then this past October, the horrific shooting at Central Visual and Performing Arts High School became a tragic reminder of our state's decades of policy failures on gun safety. This tragedy was preventable. Instead, we saw the deadly ramifications of the reckless bill to nullify federal gun laws because police said that they felt powerless to remove the shooter's gun because under Missouri's new law, they would be penalized for enforcing federal gun law. And now a student and a teacher are dead. 7 more people were wounded, and school communities all across our state have felt the impacts of these traumas. So unfortunately, a clear line can be drawn between the St. Louis High School shooting tragedy and our state's lack of gun safety laws, including the enactment of the nullification law, but also repealing background checks and our state's refusal thus far to enact an extreme risk law. Constant heartbreak should not and cannot be our reality in Missouri. We should be working, instead of taking steps backward, we should be taking steps forward that would keep guns out of the hands of dangerous individuals and support communities who want to enact their own solutions to gun violence. While Missouri is facing one of the most terrible gun violence epidemics in the country, we should not be advancing bills that tie the hands of police and threatening their cash flow, as the bill sponsor has said elsewhere. So I urge the members of this committee to please vote no on this dangerous piece of legislation.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Senator Beck, go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for what you do. I appreciate it. A couple of things I want to talk about is the shooting. Let's start on the shooting in St. Louis, a little bit of that. So if you read that story, and from the beginning, it was tragic to begin with, but then as the story unfolded and you saw all the things that went wrong because of laws passed by Republicans in the state,
Yes.
During that thing, those 2 people ended up dead, and the 7 wounded, like you said. Police had to go into a building that they would have never had to go into and put their lives in danger.
Yes.
All those things, and thank God the gun fell apart and jammed on them. Basically, otherwise there would have been a lot more deaths. But let's go through that whole scenario of all the laws that have failed to the people of Missouri. Those, in particular, those 2 people that were killed that day.
Yes.
So the kid was having mental issues and a family, and there was getting treatment, right? And he actually went to a registered gun store to buy a gun and was refused. But he went outside and legally bought one on the street, which you can do in Missouri, with no paperwork, no nothing, no anything. So he went out and bought a gun legally. It was
Right.
not an illegal act. He bought it legally. Then the family was concerned about him. He had the gun. They asked the police to come take it away from him. The police said they couldn't take it away from him. So they gave it to a third party who ended up giving it back. And then everything ensued from that point on. That to me is crazy that is allowed to happen. That was completely preventable. That should have never been a story.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so that part itself is troublesome to me. And to think that we can't come together to address something like that is ridiculous. Now we've got 12-year-olds running around with guns, assault pistols and guns on the streets, and there's nothing the police can do about it. Not a thing to do because of loopholes that have been put in by this body, by Republicans,
Right.
that have let this happen, that it's okay for them to carry. I know of other stories, and I don't know if it's much more of a question as it is a statement, but I'll let you address it as I go on. And I have another story that I'm working on right now. It's really concerning to me. The school district is concerned about a certain individual coming back and doing something, and this individual has been caught with guns many times.
Yep.
He actually, one of the last times he was caught with a gun. That was a stolen gun, and all he had to say was he didn't know it was stolen, and he was let off. How can that be? And that's because of laws that are passed here and the loopholes that have been passed here by by Republicans, not me, by people like this that have passed these things, and that's why these things are happening. Now, these people are concerned, and my fear is it's going to be a story that'll be on the national news saying, well, the school district didn't do anything, the juvenile courts didn't do anything, but at the end of the day, this could have been all stopped.
That's right. That's right.
And can you address that? Just the amount of the loose gun laws that we have, the SAFE Act, where we go after our police officers to try to enforce. I'm hearing stories in St. Louis County. This is not the city, St. Louis County,
Right.
of cars full of people with guns, and the cops just let them go because there's nothing they can do about it.
The
There's
police
literally
are telling-
nothing they can do
Right.
about it.
So if the police are telling us, we have to listen. I am here as a volunteer with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. I'm also a PTA volunteer in my son's high school. I hear this from the school safety officers in my community. I hear this from the teachers, from my principal. After this horrific series of events, a series of failures that led to the tragedy in this St. Louis high school in October, We felt it in Columbia, and we actually had threats and incidents happen in my own home high school. So I think that what we're seeing, people are seeing all around the state. This isn't a St. Louis problem or a Kansas City problem or a big city problem. It's a small town problem. The firearms that we have allowed to be flowing freely with no questions asked are creating crises for people from all walks of life, from all corners of our state. This is not, this isn't an extremist idea that we should support police who want to take guns away from people who should not have access to them. And that includes children, right? I mean, children should not have easy access to firearms. This is just common sense. So, I mean, I'm not sure that I've answered all of your questions.
I think you have, and it was really not a question. But also, I'm a gun owner too, so I am a gun owner, and I believe in this Second Amendment. There's also a whole other part of the Second Amendment nobody ever seems to mention, you know. But some of these folks, if I would have probably asked them the question, would it be okay for you to have a fully loaded F-18? They'd probably say, okay, yeah, that's fine. I think we draw the line of where we regulate things, you know, and that's part of the Second Amendment of where we regulate the gun ownership. And these are just common sense things. And I don't think you're against guns, right? You just want to make your kids safer, you know,
right.
or, you know,
many of the people in my group
communities,
are gun owners.
yeah.
I grew up. My father's a marksman. Went to West Point. Taught me how to shoot. I have
Sure.
gun owners in leadership in our group. I mean, I think there's a misconception that we're on different sides. What we're asking for is to go back to sort of some common sense safety laws that we had that were working for our police and for our communities not that long ago. That's the point in my testimony of bringing up those numbers. We don't have to live like this. There are red states and blue states with these gun laws saving lives. And we're not just talking, by the way, only about mass shootings. We're talking about the tragic incidents in our rural communities, especially of firearm suicide, right?
Yeah.
So the majority of gun deaths in our state are actually firearm suicides. Yeah. And we could be saving those lives as well. So, I mean, I want to go back to the idea that, you know, we're sort of talking around what happened last year when the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was passed. And, you know, 15 U.S. senators stood up and voted yes for that, including Republican Roy Blunt. This can be something that we can see people on both sides of the aisle, people who support the Second Amendment, like I do, coming together and working towards safety instead of further gutting what would work in our state. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Bratton?
You brought up the school shooting here in Missouri due to lack of red flag laws, but are you aware of Uvalde, Texas, and that school shooting?
Mm-hmm.
You realize they have the strictest red flag laws in the nation?
In Texas?
In Texas. So, and they were in place and enacted, and it was on the actual shooter had been turned in, and red flag laws were supposedly enacted. So, I mean, this thought process that because these laws are enacted, that acts of this terror will not occur, I guess.
Right.
It just doesn't hold water.
Well, I would say to that, of course, there are examples of places where the enforcement and the use of these laws is imperfect, right? And we see that, and it's tragic. And there are other places we could point to, like the tragic shooting in Buffalo that happened around that same time, where a red flag law could have made a difference, right? If an enforcement of that law.
New York has some of the strictest gun laws in the nation.
So it's implementation. It's not only having a law on the books, it's how law enforcement officers are encouraged to use that law. But the reality is that when a person is in crisis, family members and law enforcement are the first to see the warning signs. And if they have the tools available to them, they can act. And we're not talking about taking anyone's rights to due process away. We're not talking about.
But it is a stripping of due process with red flag.
It is
laws.
not, in fact. That is
The person does
misconception.
not get a hearing. They have no clue that this is occurring to them.
In all of the states where these laws are in place, this is my understanding as a volunteer, so I'll give that caveat, but courts can only issue final extreme risk protection orders. They can only do that after a hearing where an individual and the law enforcement voices come together and have a chance to present their evidence. So that's the process that's in place. And that's the case in all of the states that were affected by the better.
But it's a hearing. People are brought forward. You don't have the capability of having counsel or.
You actually can.
Well, you can, but in terms of how this usually plays out, that's not the case. You also brought up the fact of Missouri, the high rate of murders here in Missouri. Is that by legal gun owners or by people who have already illegal weapons and aren't even supposed to have them already?
I would love to get that data to you. Our organization shares breakdowns of data of that kind, but I didn't come today prepared to share a breakdown of those numbers. But I'd love to talk to you and maybe check in with your office and share that info.
And also with the unfortunate shooting in a school, I know that's. Schools have been given the proper tools in which how to protect their students and that sort of thing. Numerous school districts are refusing to enact policies that make them hard targets to ensure that regardless of something or some psychopath has a firearm, the capability to be able to stop them is, I think, more so the issue rather than just blanket gun confiscation or infringement of Second Amendment rights of individuals. They've enacted policies that basically got the capability to protect students and create soft targets. And I think that's probably why you're seeing and why we see that schools are the main targets, or movie theaters or places that have actually removed the capability of people to protect themselves or protect others. And I mean, you can't argue because it is actually and factually true that is they are happening in places that those policies are in place.
I feel like I heard you raising a question. If it's okay, I'd like to respond and say I think that many schools across Missouri are making different choices based on the needs of their community, which is, I think, what we want to see in our state. But there are best practices to keeping guns out of the hands of people who wish to do harm inside schools. Schools, I should say, first of all, are overwhelmingly safe places for our kids to learn. School shootings and shootings on school grounds are, in fact, very, very rare. So when they happen, they do draw our attention, and it's tragic, and that's why we're talking about it today. But there are some best practices that keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. And one of the number one ways that our organization argues that we could keep schools safer is by urging, through public education and other means, for people to lock up their guns and store them safely. Because the number one thing that we know about people who are bringing guns into schools is that they often are people who are from that school community, right? So it might be a student, a former student, somebody who has access to that building. So the hardening of schools is a separate conversation. We certainly have it in my community. But the thing that would be most effective is to work harder to educate our communities about storing their firearms safely away from where people can have access to them, including people who are disturbed or in distress, right? So
would you come in support of a bill that required gun safety be taught in schools?
It depends very much on what you're talking about. I mean, our organization believes very strongly that the responsibility is on adults to keep firearms out of the hands of kids who shouldn't have them, right? So the education needs to go to those parents, to those family members. It's not enough to trust an impulsive kid or a kid who's in emotional distress to always do the right thing. So we don't, of course, train your kids with safe use of firearms, absolutely. But we're talking about adults here rather than specifically educating kids, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess if you educate kids and they're brought up knowing, what is and isn't safe practices, that I guess why would a school setting not be a proper place to teach, especially when it's a constitutional right and the dangers of not knowing how to handle firearms or what to do with a firearm if you encounter one, I guess.
There's a lot of research that suggests that kids having that safety training, that the result of that safety training doesn't prove to change the playing field very much in terms of kids' willingness to not act impulsively around a firearm. So there have been some studies about kids who've taken training, and the result is not super encouraging. So if we really want to take action that's proven, that's like based on standards that have been researched and checked and have been borne out through experience, I'm not sure that what you're suggesting is the way to go.
Well, I guess I could say that, and I'm glad you say that, because I could say that with red flag laws or any sort of gun restriction laws. I mean, we look at cities like Chicago, the strictest gun laws in the entire nation. Does it seem to be working there? I mean, they even have a website, a daily running live of murders that occur. I mean, it's literally like warfare that occurs over the weekends. So I guess it's the same argument. I mean, we come here and want to testify for blanket gun confiscation or blanket laws that allow the elimination of due process, which is what these do. In terms of feel-good policies and measures.
I would just say, because that's a big can of worms that you open there, I would just say one thing, which is that the evidence shows that gun laws do save lives, and I think that what we're doing is not working, and the majority of Missourians would agree that the tragic loss of life is not okay, and the direction we're going in is not okay. So I would disagree with your take on the effectiveness and the point of having gun laws, and I'd love to share more data with you and look at the country and look at data in a meaningful way, and maybe that's something we can talk about.
I'll be happy to, but I would disagree that I think that majority of Missourians are wanting to confiscate or to enact stricter gun laws.
No, I said I think the majority of Missourians are really disturbed by the increase in violence, and they're looking for action, and so doing more of the same is not what people want. And I'm speaking on behalf of a very large organization, and that's all I can do is speak on behalf of our folks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. Anybody else in opposition to Senate Bill 10, please come forward. Anybody for informational purposes only? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 10. I move we adjourn. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. We're adjourned.